Hi, neighbors. I'm so happy you joined us today. In this episode, Judith and I get into an interesting conversation about the speed of connection today versus 30 or more years ago and how it impacts us. It all started when I was looking through my box of old letters. Do you have a box like that? As I started thinking about this topic and recalling the feelings I had when I would receive a letter from someone in the past versus today when I receive a text or even an email, I did a little research to see what's been studied about this. Turns out quite a lot. Since we try to keep these episodes under 30 minutes and I want to get into the conversation with Judith, I'm not going to share a ton of my findings right now. But I really liked a blog post from Psychology Today website written by Ankita Guchait, and I'll add it to the show notes. The blog is easy to read and relatable, and Ms. Guchait includes references to some detailed studies on how texting, and specifically the space between sending and receiving texts, impacts us in ways we might not have anticipated when the capability to text first emerged. Do you want to bring this conversation topic into your own life? We've got your back. Hop over to our website, frontporchretreats.com, and grab the free conversation guide that goes with this episode. Use the conversation guide to initiate and experience more and deeper conversations in your own life. See our show notes for links and more information. One last note. The conversations we bring you are always authentic. And like all good front porch conversations, Judith and I don't always anticipate where they'll lead. We usually have a theme or question in our minds when we kick the conversation off. But sometimes, as we explore and share, the conversation might take a turn away from the topic. This conversation is an example of that. Funny enough, I actually was thinking this conversation might be more about delayed gratification when we started it, but it's really not. So I guess that's a topic we'll chat about another time. Okay, let's get into the conversation now. So Judith, the other day I was looking through my box where I keep mementos and notes from family and, pictures the kids have colored or made me. And I found some of the letters that my grandma wrote me when I was a kid in her beautiful cursive handwriting. If you remember, she has the most impeccable handwriting. She often addressed her letters to me by her nickname for me, Sweet Feet. And I was thinking how incredibly rare it is to get a handwritten letter from anyone these days. I think the last one I remember was a thank you note last year from a neighbor, actually, whom I had extended support during a difficult period. But letters like my grandmother wrote me, which were often, just a couple pages on simple lined paper, and she'd share things happening in her world and ask me a question or two about what was going on with me. What struck me is we could have picked up the phone to convey our thoughts to each other, but we generally didn't. And because our life news that we shared with each other, well, there was never really any urgency to it. It was just, keeping in touch and sharing the often rather dull but delightful details of our lives. And I remember these letters being both satisfying to receive because it reminded me I was in her thoughts, but also that I never really felt compelled to instantly whip out my notebook or some stationery and expedite a response to her. And it could be weeks between letters, and a delay from either of us never ever gave me any sense that something was wrong or that I had said the wrong thing. There just wasn't really, a strong sense of expectation in that practice. So nowadays, so many things in our lives can be instantly delivered. Fast forward many, many years. Instead of waiting for, your favorite song to come on the radio, it's so easy to just listen to it and as many times as you want. Like this podcast, there is an endless amount of other podcasts and content creation happening all the time, and it's so easy to access. If you're a Gen Zer or younger, you might never have experienced that feeling of waiting for something that today seems so trivial now because there's options. So even if you have to wait for something, let's say a new season or episode of your favorite show, there are just endless options to enjoy while you wait. So today, that feeling when someone doesn't text you back in 10 minutes, but you also know that they read your text because we have technology that can tell us that. We can experience a feeling that they're ignoring us, or that maybe we have some uncertainty because did we say something wrong? Was it the wrong emoji to use? So whereas I really didn't feel any urgency to reply to my grandmother's letter right after I received it, even if we say we're okay with a delayed text with our family, there kind of comes a point where you may start to question, like, why have they not responded to me? And it can just kind of lead to all sorts of narratives about what could be delaying their response. And a lot of times it's like centered around yourself. Did I do or say something wrong? So I'm curious maybe to explore this shift in experience today. Do you think that the waiting time in the era of handwritten letters made the connection feel different? Or maybe did it, feel more valuable when it finally happened because it was often just not that often? So I'm just curious, like, what's your experience? And you and I have talked about letters before. You have lots of, you have many letters from your past.
I have many letters from my past, but it's interesting because they were different types of letters. You think about it from the standpoint, you had people in your life that you had experiences with, and you had people in your life that you wanted to inform about things. And then again, you just had people in your life that whenever they thought about you, instead of picking up a phone, because the cost of doing a call at that time was significantly more. And during that time, it was unheard of to just be on the phone all the time.
Right.
But writing a letter at that time was a very inexpensive comparatively. In most things, if it were something critical, in fact, if you got a phone call from someone, you immediately thought that there might be a problem.
Oh, that's a really good observation. Phone calls were alarms.
Right. Today, phone calls are nothing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the same thing other than the fact that sometimes you want to turn them off.
Yes. And I will tell you, sometimes we'll call each other and I'll be like, I'm really tired of texting. Let's just talk.
So it's an interesting thing. But letters, I think at the time, whenever I was a kid anyway, that was one means of being able to connect with people that I didn't see very often. You're right. It would be just normal stuff. What they were growing in the garden, who they saw the last weekend, if they went to church, if the family was going to get together for a holiday. Because again, unless you were right there, you might not be able to be a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'd want to bring you into it. But from the standpoint of today, I don't know. It's a fascinating piece. There's some real value in being able to text and get something back within a relatively short time versus, waiting for the letter. There was an expectation that if they sent you a letter, the next week they'd get it. So
sometimes there were expectations when,
because it meant something to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was a connection and they did value it. And that was a way of being close because I was farther away from my grandparents, and that was the means of communication. Only on occasion would I ever talk to them on the phone. I mean, it was rare. And it had to be something really significant, like, Grandma, I'm going to graduate, and do you want to come out for it?
Mm-hmm.
I understand something's wrong with Grandpa. What can I do to help? Or do you need special considerations on this side? That kind of thing. So it's an interesting piece. But today, everything's instantaneous, and oftentimes it's not quite as deep.
Yeah, I think about, like, even, you and I, we text almost every day, and it's not unusual for us to call too when we get tired of texting, and I really take it for granted. Like, that's kind of what I was thinking about is, your grandchildren can literally text you anytime. They all have your phone number. So therefore, you do not get 3-page letters in the mail from them. And the types of details you get from them may vary.
Mm-hmm.
Like some may, share specific details, but I get that there are pros and cons. And I also think, like, even I remember sometimes my dad would talk to my grandparents on the phone, weekly. It was kind of like a weekly thing, if I recall. I don't know how often you talk to your dad. Not very often, yeah. But like periodically, right? And those were longer conversations to catch up. But it would have to be unusual to, like, have a phone call every day. Whereas today, it's unusual if I do not text or call you and sometimes my own children or others every day. I'm curious about, like, did I value and appreciate the communications more? Do I take it too much for granted today that, we connect so easily? And what does that do to our relationships?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I think it's according how you choose to use it. Sometimes whenever I send a note to one of the grandkids, I'll do it with a just thinking of you,
Mm-hmm.
or I love you. And I hope what that does is to let them know, indeed, I am thinking of them. It's the sort of thing that it doesn't take anything away. It's not something that I'm expecting something back. It's just letting them know. And I think that from that, it can be a good piece. If they have something they need to share, or if it's something that they need of me, they can then respond, but it's not required.
But I want to double click on that because it's so easy to text that it almost kind of seems a little nutty in this day and age to not at least send an emoji back, or like, hey, yeah, thinking of you too, because it's so easy. And, I get what you're saying, but part of me is like, well, is it so easy that we don't value those little moments of like, oh, hey, I was just thinking about you? Do we value those differently because it is so easy? Like, well, thanks, and then I feel obligated to like respond.
That could be.
I'm just curious. We're just talking.
I don't see it that way myself. I look at it from a different vantage point, I think, because a lot of times I'll be thinking about someone or I'll be considering them and I'm thinking, well, they could be thousands of miles away. And I really do want them just to know that they're in my thoughts. I'm not expecting anything in return, but it could brighten their day to know that someone's thinking about them. Would a letter do the same thing? Well, if I sat down and wrote a letter and it went through the mail system, they might get it in a week. And by that time, they're going, this. So, and why were you thinking of me? I mean, it would require a whole lot more to explain why I was thinking of them at that time. Maybe that would be good. Maybe it wouldn't be good. I don't know. But I do both. I do send letters. And I do, not real often, not like I used to, but I do send letters. I send, cards. I try to remember people, and I hope that it's of value, but I don't expect anything from anyone else. I'm doing that as much for myself as I am for them. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I don't know that there are answers, and it's probably like person to person. I just think it's kind of something interesting to think about in our era, and really where I was kind of thinking about the letter writing thing was like, and maybe it's not a great example, but my thought process was I enjoyed getting letters from my grandma. Like it wasn't like I was like jumping up and down, like waiting for the mail carrier to come, but like it was special when I got a letter from me in the mail. I felt grateful to have that experience, and I also felt fairly confident that she would write me more letters. And so like with that, it was like I didn't have, there wasn't this sense of urgency around it. And because of that, like I think about, maybe that's not a great example of delayed gratification. It's not like, it's a piece of pie and I'm like, no, I can't have that until after dinner. It's not like that, but really I was kind of thinking about it in the terms of like instantaneous as we tend to expect things to be. And maybe a better example would actually be like waiting for your favorite show to come on. And there are just so many other options that it's ridiculous how accessible television, content, entertainment is to us today. So there is no waiting to be entertained. There is no waiting at all to be entertained. Things that used to take a long time to gain that satisfaction, relatively at least. I remember I looked to watching X-Files with Dad on the television, and that came on once a week, or at least it did the new episode. So I think about that, and like that experience, it was special because it didn't happen often. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get to, is like the letter was special, not because it contained juicy gossip, but the letter from my grandma was special because it didn't happen every day. Like, does that make sense?
Makes sense. I'm going to do a little twist on it.
Oh, sure. I love those.
Because I think one of the values, and we'll stick with the letter writing for that, of the being able to write it from the standpoint of the person doing the writing is, whereas with the text, you kind of do the text and you flip it off. It goes then. Whereas with the letter writing, when you're doing it by hand or even typing it, you can go back and read it, let it sit for a moment before you send it. I think sometimes you have a higher quality interaction, and it's something that you make less mistakes in relationships. Because I think sometimes the texts give you the feeling that again, if they don't respond and you were expecting a response, that you're not important enough. If the way it was framed causes you anxiety, then there's a problem. Whereas if you're writing it and you go through it again before you send it, which I always did.
Sure.
Does that represent what I want them to feel or hear or, read?
Did you use whiteout sometimes?
In the text.
Yeah.
I just scribbled it.
I didn't really mean that.
No, and you couldn't tell. But anyway, that was a real important piece of being able to make sure that the message was the message I wanted to send.
Sure.
And I think letters are better for that. Than
The
text.
Intentionality.
Yes.
Well, I think that's where you and I have talked a lot about what Front Porch Retreats is designed around, which is we function with transactional communication constantly. And that's where I think we have such an opportunity, because we've almost gotten so used to this is how we communicate. When you have the opportunity to have a deeper, you go back and read some of the letters, the intentionality behind, I had to take time out of my day to write this letter. I don't know. I think it's kind of an interesting shift of intentionality versus the quickness. And I do think that there is a different level of value associated from both the receiver and the, what do we call that? The person sending. Sender.
Yep, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that the value of it is really significantly more with the letters. I think that and the phone calls at that time, because the phone call, if you made a call to someone whenever I was young, that meant they were very important and you had something very important to share. Now, it may not be. It's just checking in.
Well, I do remember a really important phone call that I made to my grandma one time. And it was because my Chicago Bulls were playing her Indiana Pacers, and my Bulls were totally beating her Pacers. That was really important. So, that deserved an actual phone call.
Yes.
Sorry, that just reminded me.
That's a good thing. So that's a good memory.
It's a good memory, but you're it was something I did not do all the time. We were not all, just calling each other about our basketball, but, I had to rub it in a little bit. So that warranted a call. And she was very gracious about it.
Yes. She had a good sense of humor. She really did have a good sense of humor. And she enjoyed those experiences very much. When we're talking about this, I'm not even sure that we were going to focus on delayed gratification.
Oh, we were, but I think it's totally different.
Very different. It's not delayed gratification. It's just a different intentionality, which is fascinating to me.
This is how conversations, just
evolve.
Yes.
Definitely.
So really the topic that we're talking about today is intentionality.
How you choose to do it, whether it's with a letter, a phone call, or a text. It really doesn't matter the vehicle. I don't believe it does. I think it's the intention that you have behind it. And I think that there's no reason, if you're doing a text, you can't look at that text before you send it.
Oh, yeah.
Same thing with an email. Same thing when you're preparing for a phone call. What do you want the other person to experience when they receive that? And if you think about it, if we live life with the intentionality, that so much is represented in Front Porch Retreats, because you choose to do that. You choose to take time out to listen to this podcast. You choose to take time out to chat with us on the chat, or to provide your experiences. And I hope that it will have the impact on day-to-day living. The intentionality is so critical.
I love that. And I think intentionality is, a conversation that I'd love to explore more, Judith. But for today, let's move on to our quotes. In every episode, Judith and I both share a selected quote and why it resonated with us today. My quote today is, "Don't simply show up to your life, be there on purpose." And I don't know who that's attributed to, but I think they're really smart. It resonated with me today because, we kind of got on the track of talking about intentionality here. And as we talk about, like, this goes into intentional living. So it's a little bit deeper and a little bit different than what we were just talking about, but I think it matters. Like it matters to, show up every day, and think about what you're doing there that day and how you want to not only experience your life, but have others experience you. And I think that's kind of where my head goes as we moved through our conversation earlier is, I have an opportunity to be really intentional with, I'm going to really work on sending Judith more than just transactional texts. I don't know if she'll appreciate that actually, but I'll be, I have an opportunity to rethink the intention behind what I say and how I say it. And maybe I'll think about writing a letter to someone, maybe in cursive on some notebook paper and, really be intentional and see what happens. Wouldn't that be an interesting experiment in this day and age to write a letter again? So Judith, what's your quote for today?
What's your quote again?
Oh, my quote again was, don't simply show up to your life, be there on purpose.
Wonderful. Well, mine is based on Proverbs 18:21. Be intentional with your words. They have the power to build up or tear down. And I think the reason that's so important to me is because I'm all about encouragement and getting people to be their very best if they're in my sphere. I try to think that way, but really, if you get the opportunity to do things with intention and you're able to look at what you're writing, look at what you're saying, look at how you're expressing yourself with others, whether it's a look that you give them, a smile that you have, everything with intention. Even corrections need to be with intention so that the words are aligned with the behavior you're hoping to change, yours or others, which is fascinating to me. So living with intention, loving with intention, acting with intention, writing with intention, everything we do with the intention and moving things forward in a positive way.
I really like that, Judith. That's beautiful, and it gives me something else to think about as I go into my day and as I have the next conversations in my day. It gives me an opportunity to stop and think, how do I want to show up with this person? And how do I want them to experience me? And what is my intention? And sometimes I think we forget to even think about our intentions.
Exactly.
Very important. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought. I love this quote by Sean Stevenson. He said, "Communication is merely an exchange of information, but connection is an exchange of humanity." This stuck with me. In a world that is obsessed with the speed of information, I hope you find the time to prioritize the exchange of your humanity. Whether it's through a letter to a sweetie in your life or a text that asks for nothing in return, I hope you move into your day trusting the quiet and recognizing that the depth of our connections isn't found in or defined by how fast we respond. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe to the Front Porch Retreats channel on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Know someone who would benefit from hearing it? Please share. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Front Porch Retreats. And you can find the full conversation guide for this episode on our website, frontporchretreats.com. Use the conversation guide to initiate and experience more and deeper conversations in your own life. See our show notes for links and more information. See you soon. Bye, neighbors.